What would you do if you were praying one day in your devotions and then all of a sudden God spoke to you from heaven after you had made a request and said, you do not know what you just asked for? That actually happened one day to James and John in Mark 10. Their response to that and Jesus' reaction to them and instruction that followed teaches us a great deal about prayer and about what it means to be great in the eyes of God. We left off last time with the rich young ruler walking away and Jesus explaining how the first will be last and last will be first. Mark picks up the story again in verse 32 of Mark 10 with a dramatic, tense scene. It couldn't be more dramatic. Verse 32, Mark 10:32, they were on their way up to Jerusalem with Jesus leading the way, and the disciples were astonished while those who followed were afraid. Now, by this point, we're used to seeing the disciples astonished. They basically have been that way through the whole book. They're always astonished. The whole last couple of years, they've lived that way. But this time, it's different. There's something different. All the other times they're astonished, it's always right after a miracle. It comes at the end of a scene after a miracle. Here it's at the beginning of a scene, and there's no miracle. So what's so astonishing? What's so amazing? The only thing Mark says is that Jesus was walking ahead of them, outpacing them is what the word means. Why is that so astonishing? I mean, are they just impressed with his speed? They're like, wow, Jesus really booking it. Look at the guy, look at him go. No, if you want to know what had the disciples so amazed and those who followed so afraid, we just have to look at what Mark says here in verse 32. He gives us one clue. He says they were on their way up to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is where Jesus is going to die. He's been saying that. The city of Jerusalem has been the center of opposition against Jesus throughout the whole book of Mark. The disciples have seen that. They've witnessed the delegations who have come from Jerusalem and opposed Jesus. They didn't fully understand everything Jesus said when he said, I'm going there to die, I'm going to suffer, I'll rise again. All that. They didn't understand enough, but they understood enough to know that they didn't want to understand more. Remember that in chapter 9? They knew it was bad, and they knew it was going to happen in Jerusalem. So when you see that they're approaching Jerusalem, Mark expects you to start hearing this dark, ominous music in the background, this scary music, and then he wants you to see their body language. Verse 32, they were on their way up to Jerusalem with Jesus leading the way, and the disciples were astonished while those who followed were afraid. So there's Jesus charging out ahead of everybody, the disciples dragging their feet behind him, and then another group of followers trailing behind the disciples even further, shaking in their boots because Jesus was leading them all right into the lion's den in Jerusalem. I love this verse because it's a snapshot of what the church looks like when Jesus leads us places we don't want to go. There's a crossroads, a bunch of signs pointing different roads, and one of the signs points down this way and it says suffering, humiliation, lowliness, death. And Jesus takes that road and the disciples are like, really? We're going there? Oh boy. And they follow, but in slow motion. Like when you tell your kids it's time to go to bed, they're watching TV and it's bedtime, and you say, get up and go to bed, and they move as slowly as human beings are capable of moving, right? That's what this is like. But Jesus is pushing out ahead of them because it's time for this nightmare to be over with. He didn't want to suffer. He didn't want to go through with it, but he was eager to accomplish the work. Luke 12:50, but I have a baptism to undergo, and how distressed I am until it is accomplished. Jesus is about to teach them and us some important principles about following him down that road. And the whole lesson is illustrated in this dramatic snapshot in verse 32. Our heroic Savior leads the way, a fixed purpose stamped on his face, urgency in his pace, confidently striding ahead of us with determination and poise. And even in our confusion and fear and timidity, we look to him and we're inspired to follow. That's the picture. This is the very definition of heroism. Jesus, our hero, an iron will, incapable of deflection, plunging ahead into a world of suffering to follow his Father's will. If I were an artist, this is the verse I would want to paint. I would love to see a depiction of this. What a marvelous image. So, what does Jesus do? He picks up on their body language. He sees them dragging. He sees their apprehension, their fear, so he stops. He lets them catch up. Then he pulls the 12 aside, away from the others, and gives them some private instruction. And what does he say? Does he calm them? Does he say, oh, don't worry, guys, it's going to be okay, we'll get through this together, and all that? No, just the opposite. He confirms their worst fears. Verse 32, again, he took the 12 aside and told them what was going to happen to him. Just the 12. This is private. It's always private. It's always just them. The rest of his followers don't get to hear this. Jesus reserves his clearest and most important revelations to those who are the most serious about following him. These are the men who had left everything to follow him. They're serious about it. They've put it all on the line to be identified with Jesus. And even in this scene, physically, they're the closest to Jesus. They're following the closest to Jesus. The group that's afraid, they're lagging back behind, and they don't get to hear this. The closer you walk with Jesus, the more revelation he confides in you. So, verse 33, he pulls the 12 aside and he says, we're going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered to the chief priests and teachers of the law. The word delivered means to turn someone over to the control of someone else. Someone was going to have power over Jesus, enough power to be able to hand Jesus over to the control of the Sanhedrin, which is the Supreme Court of Israel, which operated in Jerusalem. And he says they will condemn him to death and will deliver him over to the Gentiles. So Jesus is going to get delivered again. He's getting passed around, this time to the Gentiles. The Jews didn't have the legal authority to put someone to death. They had to get the Romans to agree to do that. So the Romans were going to agree and carry this out. What could be worse than for a Jewish Messiah to be mocked and killed by Romans, Gentiles? Verse 34, who will mock him and spit on him. Doesn't get any more humiliating than being spit on, especially by Gentiles. When Jesus talks about his suffering, it's interesting to note how often he refers to the humiliation of it, the insults, the ridicule. That is a very, very significant part of what Jesus accomplished. His work of redemption was suffering that ridicule. And when we suffer ridicule, that's a very big part of it as well. Verse 34, they'll flog him and kill him. 3 days later, he will rise. That's the 5th time in Mark where Jesus has let them know about his upcoming suffering. And this time, it's the most detailed announcement yet. And this is the first time he gives details about the mocking and the spitting and the flogging and the Gentiles being involved. There's a lot of new information this time. So he says, you guys, you're nervous about the fact that you think horrible things are going to happen in Jerusalem? You don't know the half of it, let me tell you. And then he goes on and lets them know all this. Why does Jesus do this? Is he just trying to scare them senseless? I mean, what is the point of all this? No, he's not trying to scare them. Jesus has 3 very important reasons that he keeps on telling them about all this. Here's one. First, it's crucial that they understand that his suffering and death are necessary. It's essential. Back in chapter 8, when he first mentioned it, he said, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, and he must be killed. Must. That refers to the divine plan. It has to happen. Mark 9:12, the next chapter. The Son of Man must suffer much and be rejected. And then he says it again in this passage. They need to know that this is planned, this by God. The cross is not just God allowing evil to run amok and then coming along behind and trying to make the best of a bad situation or bringing some good out of a bad situation. That is not what's going on. This is not plan B. This is plan A from before the foundation of the world. It was the Lamb who was slain from the foundation of the world. You understand that language. It couldn't have been any other way. This plan could not have been altered. It could not have been adjusted. It must happen. It must happen exactly as Jesus said it would happen, and it did. You read the rest of the book and you find that this announcement, verses 33 and 34, basically reads like a table of contents for the rest of the book of Mark. I mean, just point by point, just goes right through. It happened exactly as Jesus lays it out. There's a world of difference between your ability to handle suffering without knowing that this is part of God's plan, and suffering when you know that this is the plan. A world of difference. It's so important to Jesus that we understand this is God's plan. It's essential. It's essential for Jesus, it's essential for us. And that's one reason why Jesus keeps bringing it up, part of God's plan. The second reason why he brings it up is to let them know that they're part of that plan. Remember the first time Jesus brought this up in chapter 8, he said that. He said, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and teachers of the law, and he must be killed. And then in verse 34, if anyone would follow me, he must take up his cross. So Jesus is including them. Every time he shows his destiny, he reminds us that it's our destiny too. Okay? So much of the book of Mark is devoted to preparing the disciples to join Jesus in his suffering. That is required of every Christian. We must suffer with him. 1 Peter 2:20, if you suffer for doing good and endure it, this is commendable before God. To this you were called because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. We suffer with him. And if I read all the verses in the New Testament about suffering with Christ, it would be here all night. So Jesus wants them to know that this is plan A. He wants them to understand that they're part of the plan and must suffer with him. And then thirdly, most importantly, he wants them to place their hope in the right thing. Verse 34, who will mock him and spit on him, flog him and kill him. 3 days later, he will rise. He says that every time. Every time he tells them about his death, he tells them about the resurrection, but they never seem to hear that part. On the other side of this horrible dark valley of the shadow of death will be glorious new life. That's the promise. That's our hope. That's where our hope must be placed. Our tendency is to place our hope in avoiding the valley. We just want to camp out here, over here on the safe side of the valley and not go through the suffering. And Jesus heroically, resolutely leads the way right through that valley into the glory of resurrection life on the other side. If we remain skittish about suffering, or afraid of it, we'll never be able to follow close by Jesus and stay at his side as he leads us. So, number one, realize this is God's plan. Number two, realize you're part of this plan. And number three, set your hope on the glory on the other side. That will help you go through the suffering, through the dark valley to the glory. That's how you can stop dragging your heels when Jesus leads you where you don't want to go.
Thank you for listening. If you found today's episode edifying, why not share with a friend? A simple post on social media can change a person's day. This season, the Food for Your Soul podcast features excerpts from our sermon series on the Gospel of Mark. Over 130 expository sermons covering every verse. You can find those and hundreds of other sermons for free download on drichardferguson.com. Until next time, rejoice in the Lord always and set your mind on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God.